One night, one drink, one kiss, accidentally streamed through the wrong AirPods. The bass from the rooftop party 3 floors above my cramped studio apartment vibrated through the ceiling like a relentless heartbeat, each thump a reminder of the life I couldn't afford to live. I pressed my AirPods deeper into my ears, cranking up the volume on my meditation app, desperately trying to drown out the sound of Manhattan's elite having what sounded like the party of the century. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a 28-year-old marketing coordinator barely scraping by in New York City, using noise-canceling technology to escape the very world I spent my days crafting campaigns to sell to. My phone buzzed against the scratched surface of my second-hand IKEA desk. Another email from my boss at Sterling & Associates, probably wondering why the Henderson luxury watch campaign wasn't generating the engagement metrics she'd promised the client. I glanced at the time, 11:47 p.m. on a Friday night, and Janet was still sending work emails. The woman had no concept of work-life balance. But then again, when you're pulling down 7 figures as a senior partner at one of Manhattan's most prestigious marketing firms, I guess the lines blur. The meditation app's soothing voice guided me through another breathing exercise, but my mind kept wandering to the stack of bills on my kitchen counter. Rent was due in 3 days, and even with my roommate Mia splitting the cost of our shoebox apartment on the Upper East Side, and I use the term Upper East Side very loosely, considering we were basically living in a converted storage unit, I was still short about $400. The freelance graphic design work I'd been picking up on weekends barely covered groceries, and my student loans felt like a weight around my neck that grew heavier each month. A particularly loud burst of laughter from above made me wince. These people probably spent more on a single bottle of champagne tonight than I made in a week. I'd grown up in a small town in Ohio where a night out meant dinner at Applebee's and maybe a movie, where people knew your name and your family's history going back 3 generations. New York was supposed to be my fresh start, my chance to make something of myself in the big city. 3 years later, I was starting to wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake. My AirPods died with a soft chime, the battery finally giving up after a full day of use. Great. Now I was stuck listening to what sounded like a full-blown rave happening directly above my head. I reached for my charging case, fumbling around in the dim light of my desk lamp. The overhead light had burned out 2 weeks ago, and I kept forgetting to buy a replacement bulb. As I popped the AirPods back into the case, my phone lit up with an incoming call. Mia flashed across the screen, along with a photo of my roommate making her signature ridiculous face, tongue out, eyes crossed. The picture taken during happier times when we could still afford to go out for drinks after work. I accepted the call, grateful for any distraction from my mounting anxiety about money and my seemingly stagnant career. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing tales like this one. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from viewers all around the world. Emma, thank God you answered. Mia's voice was slightly slurred, background noise indicating she was definitely not calling from the quiet of her bedroom. I need a huge favor, and I know this is super last minute, but I'm kind of in a situation here. I leaned back in my desk chair, which creaked ominously under even my modest weight. What kind of situation? And please tell me you're not calling me from a jail cell, because I literally cannot afford to bail you out right now. No, nothing like that. Mia laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. I'm at this incredible party. Seriously, Em, you should see this place. There's an actual ice sculpture and the view of Central Park is insane. But here's the thing. I may have told someone that my roommate is a big-shot marketing executive, and now they want to meet you. My stomach dropped. Mia, what did you do? Okay, don't freak out, but you know how I've been seeing that guy Trevor? The one who works in finance? Well, he invited me to this party tonight, and it's like all these incredibly successful people, CEOs, entrepreneurs, that kind of crowd, and I guess I got a little carried away trying to impress his friends, and I may have embellished. Your job title. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. How embellished are we talking? I told them you're a senior marketing executive at Sterling and Associates, and that you've handled campaigns for major luxury brands, and that you're kind of a big deal in the industry. Mia! I practically shouted, then caught myself, remembering our paper-thin walls and the neighbors who already complained about every little noise. I'm a coordinator. I make PowerPoint presentations and organize client lunches. I'm about as far from a senior executive as you can get, without being an unpaid intern. I know, and I'm sorry. But here's the thing. There's this guy here, and he's apparently some kind of tech mogul or something, and he's looking for a marketing consultant for a new project. Trevor thinks this could be huge for you. Like career-changing huge. He wants to meet you tomorrow for coffee. My mind raced. On one hand, this was exactly the kind of deception that could blow up spectacularly in my face. On the other hand, I was 3 days away from not being able to make rent, and if there was even a small chance this could lead to legitimate freelance work. What kind of tech mogul? I asked, hating myself for even considering this. His name is, hold on, let me ask Trevor. There was muffled conversation in the background, the kind of animated chatter that only happened at parties where the alcohol was top shelf and flowing freely. Alexander Chen. Apparently he sold some kind of software company for like a ridiculous amount of money, and now he's starting something new. Clean energy tech or something like that? Alexander Chen. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. In my line of work, I'd heard dozens of names of successful entrepreneurs and business leaders, though most of them blended together in my memory. Look, Em, I know this is crazy, but what if you just met him for coffee? You don't have to pretend to be something you're not. Just, maybe don't immediately tell him you're barely keeping your head above water financially. The party noise above me reached a crescendo. It sounded like they'd started playing music with actual live instruments now. A saxophone, maybe. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what it would be like to have enough money to hire live musicians for a casual Friday night party. Fine, I said, the word escaping before I could stop myself. But I'm not going to lie to him. If he asks about my experience, I'll be honest about what I actually do. Yes, Emma, you're the best. I'll get his contact info from Trevor and text it to you. The coffee thing is tomorrow at 2 p.m. at that place on Madison and 79th. You know, the one with the ridiculously expensive lattes that we always walk past and dream about actually buying. Café Morgenstern. I knew it well. It was the kind of place where a simple cappuccino cost more than my usual lunch budget for 3 days. The kind of place where people in perfectly tailored suits conducted million-dollar deals over artisanal pastries. Mia. What am I supposed to wear? My entire professional wardrobe consists of 3 blazers from Target and a collection of blouses that are slowly falling apart. We'll figure it out. You can borrow my black dress, the one I wore to that wedding last month. It's professional but not too stuffy, and it'll look amazing on you. Oh, and my good heels, the ones that don't have scuff marks all over them. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment, the party upstairs having finally moved to a different area of the building. The sudden quiet felt almost oppressive after hours of constant noise. I opened my laptop and typed Alexander Chen Tech Entrepreneur into Google, curiosity getting the better of me. The search results made my breath catch in my throat. Alexander Chen wasn't just some moderately successful tech guy. He was the founder and former CEO of Neuralink Dynamics, a software company that had revolutionized data processing for major corporations. The company had sold to Microsoft 2 years ago for $8 billion. Billion. With a B. His photo showed a man who looked to be in his early 30s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an easy smile that suggested he was comfortable in front of cameras. The articles described him as a visionary entrepreneur and one of tech's most eligible bachelors, though more recent pieces mentioned his reputation for being intensely private and selective about his business partnerships. I scrolled through article after article, each one painting a picture of someone who existed in a completely different stratosphere from my own. Private jets, multiple homes, charitable foundations, board positions at major corporations. This was a man who could probably buy my entire apartment building without thinking twice about it. What was I doing? There was no way someone like Alexander Chen would be interested in hiring someone like me for anything more substantial than organizing his dry cleaning. But then again, what did I have to lose? At worst, I'd have an expensive cup of coffee and a story to tell. At best, well, I couldn't even let myself imagine what at best might look like. I spent the next hour researching everything I could find about clean energy technology and current market trends, taking notes in a spiral notebook that had seen better days. If I was going to do this, I was at least going to be prepared. My marketing coordinator's salary might be pathetic, but I'd earned my degree from Northwestern, and I'd learned a thing or two about presenting ideas professionally over the past 3 years. By the time I finally crawled into bed, it was after 2 a.m., and the party upstairs had finally quieted to a dull murmur. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of late-night traffic on 3rd Avenue, I tried to quiet the voice in my head that kept insisting I was setting myself up for humiliation. Tomorrow, I would meet Alexander Chen. Tomorrow, I would sit across from a billionaire and try to convince him that I was worth his time. Tomorrow, everything might change. Or tomorrow, I might learn exactly how far out of my league I really was. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing insistently on my nightstand. The morning light filtering through my thin curtains was the pale, watery kind that suggested it was still early. Too early for a Saturday morning after staying up past 2 a.m. I groped for my phone, squinting at the screen through bleary eyes. 8:23 a.m. 3 missed calls from Mia, and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. "Emma, wake up! Emergency! Trevor just told me something about Alexander Chen and I think we might be in trouble. Call me now." My stomach dropped as I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. I called Mia back and she answered before the first ring finished. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. "Emma, I think I might have seriously screwed up. What happened? Did you tell more people about my fake job title?" No, nothing like that. It's about Alexander Chen. Trevor was telling me more about him this morning and apparently... God, I feel so stupid. Apparently, he's kind of famous for testing people. I rubbed my eyes, trying to focus. What do you mean, testing people? Like, he's known for creating situations where he can see how genuine someone is. Trevor said, there are all these stories about him pretending to be someone else, or showing up to meetings in casual clothes to see how people treat him, or asking pointed questions to figure out if people are lying about their credentials. The coffee I hadn't even had yet was already souring in my stomach. Mia, are you telling me I'm about to walk into some kind of elaborate trap? I don't know. Maybe. Trevor said he heard about this one time where Chen pretended to be a regular customer at a restaurant to test whether the manager he was thinking about hiring for one of his companies would treat all customers well, not just the ones who looked wealthy. I got out of bed and started pacing my small bedroom, which meant basically walking back and forth 3 steps in each direction. This is insane. I can't do this. I'm going to call and cancel. No, wait. Emma, think about it. If you go in there and you're just honest about who you are and what you actually do, then you'll pass any test he might throw at you, right? You're one of the most genuine people I know. You don't have a deceptive bone in your body, except for the part where I'm meeting him under false pretenses because my roommate lied about my job. That's not your fault, and you already said you're planning to be honest with him. Look, maybe Trevor is wrong. Maybe these are just rumors. But either way, you've got nothing to lose. After we hung up, I stood in my shower letting the lukewarm water, our building's hot water situation was questionable at best, wash over me while I tried to think through my options. I could cancel, spend the day sending out more freelance applications, and continue my slow slide toward financial disaster. Or I could show up, be completely honest about who I was and what I could offer, and see what happened. By the time I was getting dressed, I'd made my decision. If Alexander Chen wanted to test my authenticity, then authenticity was exactly what he was going to get. Mia's black dress fit better than I'd expected, and her heels, while slightly too big, would work as long as I didn't have to do much walking. I looked at myself in our full-length mirror, which was propped against the wall because we'd never gotten around to hanging it properly. The woman looking back at me appeared professional and put together, even if she felt like she was drowning on the inside. I had 4 hours until the meeting, so I decided to walk to the coffee shop to familiarize myself with the area and maybe find a quiet spot nearby where I could review my notes one more time. The October morning was crisp and bright, the kind of perfect fall day that made New York City feel like it belonged in a movie. Trees along the sidewalks were just beginning to turn golden, and there was that particular quality to the light that photographers called magic hour, even though it was barely 10 a.m. Madison Avenue was bustling with its usual weekend crowd, couples strolling hand in hand, families with children in strollers, tourists consulting their phones and pointing excitedly at landmarks. I found Cafe Morgenstern easily enough. It occupied the ground floor of an elegant brownstone, with large windows that offered views of the tree-lined street and small outdoor tables that were already occupied despite the early hour. I spent the next hour in a nearby park, sitting on a bench and reviewing everything I'd learned about clean energy technology, Alexander Chen, and current marketing trends in the tech sector. My notebook was filled with talking points and potential questions, though I suspected that all my preparation might be useless if this really was some kind of elaborate personality test. At 1:45 p.m., I positioned myself outside Cafe Morgenstern, trying to calm my nerves and watching the door for anyone who might be Alexander Chen. The photos I'd found online showed a polished, confident-looking man in expensive suits, so I was scanning the crowd for someone who fit that description. At exactly 2 p.m., I heard someone behind me say, "Excuse me, are you Emma?" I turned around and found myself looking at a guy who definitely did not match the photos I'd studied. He was tall, probably around 6 feet, with slightly messy dark hair and wearing jeans, sneakers, and a plain gray hoodie. His eyes were the same intelligent dark brown from the pictures, but everything else about him seemed designed to blend into the background. He looked like a graduate student, or maybe a freelance graphic designer. Basically, he looked like he belonged in my world, not the world of billion-dollar business deals. "Yes, I'm Emma," I said, extending my hand. "You must be Alexander." He shook my hand with a firm grip and a smile that seemed genuinely warm. "Alex, please. Thanks for meeting me on such short notice. Should we go in?" The interior of Cafe Morgenstern was exactly what I'd expected. Exposed brick walls, vintage pendant lighting, and the kind of carefully curated shabby chic aesthetic that cost a fortune to achieve. The scent of freshly ground coffee beans and something that smelled like cinnamon and vanilla filled the air. Alex gestured toward a small table in the corner, positioned so we'd have privacy but still be able to people-watch through the large front windows. "What can I get you?" he asked, and I realized he was planning to order for both of us. I glanced at the menu board behind the counter and tried not to wince at the prices. A basic cappuccino was $12. $12 for coffee felt like a moral failing when I was 3 days away from not making rent. "Just a regular coffee would be great," I said, black. He raised an eyebrow. "You sure? Their lavender honey latte is supposed to be incredible." "Coffee's perfect." "Really?" While Alex was at the counter ordering, I took the opportunity to study him more carefully. There was something about the way he moved that suggested quiet confidence, but he also seemed to be making an effort to appear casual and approachable. His clothes were expensive, now that I looked more closely. I could tell the jeans were designer, and the hoodie was made from incredibly soft-looking material, but he wore them like they were just regular weekend clothes. He returned to our table with our drinks. He'd gotten himself something that looked elaborate and foam-heavy, while mine was indeed just black coffee in a simple ceramic mug. But it was good coffee, better than anything I'd had in months. "So," Alex said, settling into his chair, "Mia tells me you're doing some interesting work at Sterling & Associates." Here it was, the moment of truth. I took a sip of my coffee to buy myself a few seconds, then decided to dive in with complete honesty. Actually, I need to clear something up right away. Mia may have embellished my position a little bit. I'm not a senior executive at Sterling and Associates. I'm a marketing coordinator, which basically means I make PowerPoint presentations, coordinate client meetings, and handle a lot of administrative tasks for the actual executives. Alex's expression didn't change, but I thought I caught a flicker of something. Surprise? Amusement? In his eyes. Okay, he said simply. Tell me about what you actually do. For the next 20 minutes, I found myself telling Alex Chen, billionaire tech entrepreneur, about my real life. I told him about the Henderson luxury watch campaign that was struggling to gain traction, about staying up until midnight tweaking social media strategies, about the satisfaction I got from finding just the right angle to make a product resonate with consumers. I told him about my background growing up in Ohio, about choosing Northwestern for college, about the shock of moving to New York and discovering that entry-level marketing jobs barely paid enough to survive in the city. What surprised me was how intently he listened. He asked thoughtful questions about my approach to different types of campaigns, about challenges I'd faced and how I'd overcome them. He seemed genuinely interested in the details of my work, even the mundane parts like client relationship management and budget allocation. "What's the best campaign you've worked on?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. I thought about it for a moment. Honestly, it was this tiny project for a local Brooklyn bakery. They had zero budget, but they made these incredible artisanal donuts, and they were struggling to compete with the big chains. I convinced my boss to let me take it on as a pro bono project, just to build my portfolio. What did you do? I focused on storytelling. The owner, Mrs. Kim, had immigrated from South Korea 30 years ago, and these donut recipes were her way of blending Korean flavors with classic American pastries. I created a social media campaign around the idea of flavors that tell your story, and we featured different customers talking about what home meant to them while they enjoyed Mrs. Kim's donuts. Alex was nodding, clearly engaged. What was the result? They went from selling maybe 50 donuts a day to having lines around the block. Mrs. Kim ended up opening a second location 6 months later. It wasn't a big budget campaign, and it didn't win any industry awards, but it changed a family's life. That felt more important than any luxury watch campaign ever could. That's exactly the kind of thinking I'm looking for, Alex said, and something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. What kind of project are you working on? I asked. Alex paused, seeming to consider his words. I'm launching a clean energy company focused on making solar technology accessible to low-income communities. The technical side is solid. We've got the efficiency rates and cost projections to make it work. But I need someone who understands how to reach people who've been ignored by the clean energy movement so far. People like Mrs. Kim? Exactly like Mrs. Kim. And like, he gestured vaguely, like people who grew up in small towns in Ohio and moved to New York to chase their dreams, even when it meant living paycheck to paycheck. There was something in the way he said it that made me study his face more closely. Alex, can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you dressed like you're about to go study at the library instead of like you're conducting business meetings? Because I looked you up last night and the photos of you online suggest you own more than one suit. He laughed, and it was a genuine, unguarded sound that transformed his entire face. Okay, you caught me. I wanted to see how you'd react to meeting someone who didn't look like what you were expecting. And most people in your situation would have spent the first 10 minutes of this conversation trying to figure out if I was actually who I said I was, or if this was some kind of joke. You just rolled with it and started talking about your actual work. I felt a flush of embarrassment. Was this whole thing a test? Not exactly a test, more like, I've learned that how someone behaves when they think they're talking to a regular person tells me a lot more about their character than how they behave when they know they're talking to someone with money. And how did I do? Alex smiled. You told me the truth about your job when you could have easily maintained the fiction. You talked about a pro bono project for a local bakery with more passion than most people talk about million-dollar campaigns. And you've been treating me like a normal human being this entire time, which is surprisingly rare in my experience. I felt something shift between us, a kind of mutual recognition that made the air feel charged with possibility. So, what happens now? Now I'd like to offer you a job. My heart stopped. What kind of job? Head of Community Outreach and Marketing for Chen Clean Energy. It's a startup, so I can't offer you the kind of corporate stability you'd have at Sterling & Associates. But I can offer you equity, creative control, and the chance to build something meaningful from the ground up. The words seemed to hang in the air between us. This was it, the moment that could change everything. But instead of feeling pure excitement, I found myself thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. Alex, I need to be completely honest with you about something else. I'm listening. I'm in pretty serious financial trouble right now. I'm 3 days away from not being able to make rent, and I've been picking up freelance work just to buy groceries. If you're offering me this position, I need to know what kind of timeline we're talking about, because I can't afford to quit my current job and then wait 3 months for this company to get off the ground. Alex leaned back in his chair, and I could see him processing this information. What if I told you I could offer you a consulting contract starting immediately, with a salary that would be double what you're making at Sterling & Associates, and then transition you to the permanent position once we've got the company structure in place? Double my salary. I tried to do the math quickly in my head, but the numbers seemed too good to be true. Are you serious? Completely serious. Emma, I've been looking for the right person to head up this division for 6 months. I've interviewed marketing executives from top firms, consultants with decades of experience, people with impressive client lists and industry connections. But none of them understood what I'm trying to do here, which is change the conversation about clean energy from being something for wealthy homeowners who want to feel good about their carbon footprint to being something that can actually improve people's lives in meaningful ways. Make it about economic opportunity, about community empowerment, about giving people control over their own energy costs instead of being at the mercy of utility companies. The passion in his voice was infectious, and I found myself leaning forward, caught up in his vision. That's exactly the kind of work I want to be doing. Then let's do it together. We spent the next 2 hours talking through the details of what this company could become. Alex had clearly been thinking about this for a long time. He had market research, technology partnerships, funding secured, and a business plan that was both ambitious and realistic. What he didn't have was someone who understood how to communicate with the communities he wanted to serve. As the afternoon sun slanted through the cafe windows, casting everything in golden light, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Real, tangible hope that my life was about to get significantly better. There's one more thing, Alex said as we were getting ready to leave. I'd like you to come to a dinner party at my place tomorrow night. Nothing formal, just a small group of people, some potential investors, a few friends, people who might be interested in what we're building. I think it would be good for you to meet them, and for them to meet you. Tomorrow night? I tried to think if I had any other plans, which was ridiculous since my social calendar was permanently empty. Sure, that sounds great. Perfect, I'll text you the address. He paused, then grinned. Fair warning, my apartment is probably going to be very different from what you're expecting, based on how today went. After he left, I sat in the cafe for another hour, nursing a second cup of coffee and trying to process what had just happened. 24 hours ago, I'd been lying in bed listening to rich people party above me, wondering how I was going to make rent. Now I had a job offer that could change my entire life, and an invitation to a dinner party with potential investors. I called Mia on my way home, and she screamed so loudly that several people on the sidewalk turned to stare at me. Emma, this is incredible. I told you this could be career-changing. I can't quite believe it's real, I admitted, dodging a group of tourists who had stopped to take photos in front of a luxury boutique. Part of me keeps waiting for the other shoe to drop. What do you mean? I don't know. It feels too good to be true. Why would someone like Alexander Chen want to hire someone like me? Because you're brilliant and talented. and you have exactly the kind of fresh perspective he needs. Because you understand what it's like to struggle financially, which means you understand his target market. Because you're genuine and passionate, and those are rare qualities in the business world. When she put it like that, it almost made sense. Almost. The rest of Saturday passed in a blur of nervous energy and cautious optimism. I researched everything I could find about Chen Clean Energy, which wasn't much since it was apparently still in stealth mode. I also tried to figure out what one wore to a dinner party at a billionaire's apartment, eventually settling on the nicest dress I owned, a simple navy blue sheath that I'd bought for job interviews, paired with Mia's good heels again. Sunday evening, I stood outside an elegant pre-war building on the Upper West Side, checking the address Alex had texted me for the third time. The building looked like the kind of place where apartments started at several $1,000,000, all limestone facade and doormen in actual uniforms. I announced myself to the concierge, who consulted a list and directed me to the penthouse elevator. The elevator opened directly into Alex's apartment, and I stepped into a space that took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park and the Manhattan skyline beyond, the city lights twinkling like stars in the gathering dusk. The apartment itself was beautifully appointed, but surprisingly warm and livable, with comfortable furniture, built-in bookshelves filled with actual books, and artwork that looked like it had been chosen for personal meaning rather than investment value. "Emma, you made it." Alex appeared at my side, and I was relieved to see he was dressed more formally tonight. Dark slacks and a button-down shirt, though still no tie. "Let me introduce you to everyone." The next hour was a whirlwind of names and handshakes. There was Margaret Sullivan, a venture capitalist who specialized in clean energy investments. David Kim, a policy expert who had worked in the Obama administration. Sarah Chen, no relation to Alex despite the shared surname, a community organizer from the Bronx, and several others whose exact roles I didn't quite catch but who all seemed extremely accomplished and intimidating. Despite my nervousness, I found myself genuinely engaged in the conversations. These weren't the kind of superficial networking exchanges I'd experienced at Sterling and Associates events. People were talking about real issues, sharing stories about communities they'd worked with, debating the best approaches to environmental justice and economic development. During dinner, Alex asked me to talk about the bakery campaign I'd mentioned the day before, and I found myself telling the story to the entire table. When I finished, Margaret Sullivan leaned forward with interest. "That's exactly the kind of community-level thinking we need more of in clean energy," she said. "Too many companies in this space are focused on top-down solutions that don't account for local needs and cultural factors." "Emma understands that because she's lived it," Alex said, and there was something in his voice that made me look at him sharply. "She knows what it's like to have to choose between paying rent and buying groceries, which gives her insight into the real barriers that prevent people from accessing clean energy solutions." The conversation continued around the table, but I was suddenly hyper-aware of Alex watching me, studying my reactions to what people were saying. There was something calculating in his attention that made me slightly uncomfortable, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. After dinner, several guests moved to the living room area, but Alex gestured for me to follow him onto the terrace. The view from outside was even more spectacular. The park spread out below us like a dark ocean dotted with lights from the paths and buildings beyond. "How are you feeling about everything?" he asked, leaning against the terrace railing. "Honestly, a little overwhelmed. These are all incredibly impressive people, and I keep wondering if I really belong in this conversation." "You absolutely belong here. In fact, you're bringing a perspective that none of the rest of us have." There it was again, that sense that he was evaluating me somehow, looking for something specific in my responses. "Alex, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Yesterday, you said this wasn't exactly a test, but I'm getting the feeling that everything tonight has been a kind of extended interview. Am I wrong?" He was quiet for a moment, looking out over the park. "You're not wrong. I'm sorry if that makes you uncomfortable. It doesn't make me uncomfortable exactly, but I feel like you're looking for something specific, and I'm not sure what it is. Alex turned to face me fully, and in the soft lighting from the apartment behind us, his expression was serious and intent. I'm looking for someone who can stay authentic even when they're surrounded by wealth and power. Someone who won't lose sight of why this work matters once they start making real money. And how do you test for that? You watch how someone behaves when they think no one important is watching. You see if they treat the waiter the same way they treat the CEO. You notice whether they change their stories depending on their audience. I thought about this, remembering the way he'd dressed for our first meeting, the careful attention he'd been paying to my interactions with his dinner guests. And how am I doing? You're doing exactly what I hoped you would do. You're being yourself. Something in his tone made me step closer to him, and suddenly I was very aware of how intimate this felt. The two of us alone on the terrace, the city spread out below us, the warmth of his body in the cool evening air. "Emma," he said, and his voice was softer now, less businesslike. "I need to tell you something else." "What?" "This job offer, it's completely legitimate. And I meant every word I said about wanting you to head up community outreach for Chen Clean Energy. But that's not the only reason I wanted to meet you." My heart started beating faster. "What do you mean?" "When Mia was talking about you at that party Friday night, it wasn't just your professional background that caught my attention. It was the way she talked about you as a person. Your sense of humor, your loyalty to your friends, the way you never complain even when things are difficult. And when I saw you yesterday," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." The air between us felt electric, charged with possibility. I knew I should step back, should maintain professional boundaries, should think about all the ways this could complicate everything. Instead, I found myself moving closer to him. "Alex, I know this complicates things," he said quickly. "And if you're not interested, we can pretend this conversation never happened and focus purely on the business relationship. But I couldn't let tonight end without being honest about how I feel." Before I could second-guess myself, I reached up and kissed him. It was supposed to be a simple kiss, a moment of acknowledging the attraction that had been building between us since yesterday afternoon. But the moment our lips met, something ignited. His hands came up to frame my face, and I could taste the wine from dinner, could feel the warmth of his skin, could hear the distant sounds of traffic far below us mixing with my own heartbeat. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "Wow," I whispered. "Yeah," he agreed, his forehead resting against mine. "Wow." We might have kissed again, but we were interrupted by the sound of laughter from inside the apartment, reminding us that we had guests who were probably wondering where their host had disappeared to. "We should go back inside," Alex said, though he made no move to step away from me. "Probably," I agreed, though I wasn't moving either. "Emma, I want you to know that whatever happens between us personally, the job offer stands. Chen Clean Energy needs you, and I think this could be an incredible opportunity for both of us professionally. And personally?" He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made my knees feel unsteady. "Personally, I'm hoping this is just the beginning." We rejoined the party, and somehow I managed to make coherent conversation for the rest of the evening, though part of my attention was always on Alex, the way he moved through his own space, the easy confidence with which he guided conversations, the occasional glances he threw in my direction that made my stomach flutter. By the time the last guests left, it was nearly midnight. Alex offered to have his driver take me home, but I insisted on taking the subway, partly because I wasn't ready to let him see my cramped studio apartment, and partly because I needed the 45-minute ride to process everything that had happened. As the train carried me downtown, I stared at my reflection in the dark windows and tried to make sense of the past 48 hours. 2 days ago, I'd been a struggling marketing coordinator who couldn't afford coffee at Cafe Morgenstern. Now I had a job offer that could change my entire financial situation, and I'd kissed a billionaire on his penthouse terrace. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. Thank you for an incredible evening. Looking forward to working together and to whatever comes next. Sweet dreams, Emma. I read the message 3 times before tucking my phone away and leaning back in my seat. Tomorrow, I would have to give notice at Sterling and Associates. Tomorrow, I would have to figure out how to navigate a professional relationship with someone I was clearly attracted to. Tomorrow, I would have to start becoming the person who could handle this new life that seemed to be opening up in front of me. But tonight, I was just going to let myself feel the happiness that was bubbling up inside me, bright and warm and full of possibility. When I finally made it home, Mia was waiting up for me, practically vibrating with curiosity. "Tell me everything," she demanded before I'd even gotten my shoes off. "And I mean everything. What was his apartment like? Who else was there? Did anything happen between you two?" I told her about the dinner, the conversations, the incredible view from the terrace. When I got to the part about the kiss, she actually squealed, "Emma, this is like something out of a movie." I know, right? I keep waiting to wake up and discover this was all a dream. So what happens now? With the job, I mean, but also with the other stuff? That was the question I'd been trying not to think too hard about during the subway ride home. I honestly don't know, Mia. The job stuff feels real. He's offered me a consulting contract that would start immediately, and the work sounds incredible. But the personal stuff, that's more complicated. Why complicated? You like him, he clearly likes you, you're both adults. He's a billionaire, Mia. He lives in a penthouse apartment that probably costs more per month than I make in a year. His dinner parties include venture capitalists and policy experts and community leaders. I'm a marketing coordinator from Ohio who shops at Target and eats ramen for dinner 3 nights a week. Mia sat down on our tiny couch and patted the cushion next to her. "Emma, can I tell you something?" "Sure." "You've spent the last 3 years in New York believing that you're not good enough for the life you want. Not smart enough, not connected enough, not sophisticated enough. But everything that's happened this weekend proves that's not true. Does it? Or does it prove that I'm good at pretending to be something I'm not? You weren't pretending tonight. You were just being yourself, and look what happened. Alexander Chen, who could literally hire anyone in the world, chose you. Not because you fooled him into thinking you were someone else, but because he saw exactly who you are." I leaned back against the couch cushions, feeling suddenly exhausted. "It's scary, Mia. What if I'm not ready for this? What if I screw it up? Then you'll figure it out as you go, just like everyone else does. Emma, you've been ready for something like this your whole life. You just never had the opportunity before." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of my neighborhood. Sirens in the distance, someone's television playing too loudly, the hum of traffic that never really stopped in Manhattan. In a few weeks, if everything Alex had promised came to pass, I might be able to afford to move to a better apartment, maybe even one with reliable hot water and walls thick enough that I couldn't hear my neighbor's every conversation. The thought should have been purely exciting, but it also filled me with a strange sadness. This cramped studio apartment represented 3 years of my life, 3 years of struggling and dreaming, and slowly building something for myself in an impossible city. Moving away from it would mean leaving behind not just a physical space, but an entire version of myself. The version that had to choose between coffee and lunch, that shopped at thrift stores and ate generic cereal, that felt like an outsider looking in at a world of wealth and opportunity. I pulled out my phone and scrolled back through Alex's text messages from the evening. In addition to the good night message, he'd sent me a link to several articles about clean energy policy, along with a note. "Thought you might find these interesting for background. No rush. We can discuss them this week." Even in his text messages, he was treating me like a professional colleague, someone whose opinions and insights mattered. It was a level of respect I wasn't used to receiving in my current job, where I was often treated more like an administrative assistant than a marketing professional. I spent the next hour reading the articles he'd sent, taking notes in my phone about potential marketing angles and community engagement strategies. Despite my exhaustion, I found myself genuinely excited about the work we might do together. This wasn't just a job. It was a chance to be part of something meaningful, something that could actually make a difference in people's lives. By the time I finally fell asleep, it was nearly 3 a.m., but my mind was buzzing with ideas and possibilities. Tomorrow would be the first day of whatever came next. I woke up Monday morning to my alarm, same as always. But everything felt different. Instead of the usual dread that accompanied the start of a new work week, I felt a nervous energy, like the feeling you get on the first day of school or before a job interview. Today, I was going to give notice at Sterling & Associates. My morning routine was exactly the same as it had been for the past 3 years. Shower in lukewarm water, coffee made with the cheap beans I bought in bulk from the grocery store, checking the weather on my phone to decide which of my limited professional outfits would be most appropriate. But underneath the familiar ritual, everything had shifted. I arrived at Sterling & Associates at exactly 9 a.m., same as always. But instead of settling into my cubicle to check emails and prepare for the day's meetings, I walked straight to Janet Morrison's corner office. Janet was on the phone, but she gestured for me to sit down while she finished her conversation. I used the time to look around her office, taking in the expensive artwork and the view of Madison Avenue that I'd always envied. In a few weeks, I might have my own office with a view. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "Emma," Janet said, hanging up the phone and giving me her full attention. "What can I do for you this morning?" "I need to give you my 2 weeks' notice," I said, the words coming out more confidently than I'd expected. Janet's eyebrows shot up. "I'm sorry, what?" "I've been offered another position, and I'll be transitioning out of Sterling & Associates. My last day would be 2 weeks from Friday." For a moment, Janet just stared at me. In the 3 years I'd worked for her, I'd never surprised her with anything more dramatic than a suggestion for updating our social media strategy. "Emma, I have to say this is completely unexpected. Can I ask where you're going?" "I'm going to be heading up community outreach and marketing for a clean energy startup." "Clean energy?" Janet leaned back in her chair, clearly trying to process this information. "Emma, you don't have any experience in that sector. Are you sure this is a wise career move?" I thought about Alex's penthouse terrace, about the passion in his voice when he talked about making clean energy accessible to everyone, about the way he'd listened to my ideas as if they actually mattered. "I'm very sure," I said. The rest of the conversation was professional but chilly. Janet clearly felt blindsided by my departure, and she made several pointed comments about the importance of loyalty and career stability. But she also couldn't argue with the fact that I'd been a reliable employee who'd never caused problems. So she agreed to my 2-week transition period without much fuss. By lunchtime, word had spread through the office that I was leaving. Several of my colleagues stopped by my cubicle to express surprise and wish me luck, though I could tell that most of them thought I was making a mistake. In their world, you stayed at established companies like Sterling & Associates and slowly climbed the corporate ladder. You didn't leave for unproven startups, especially not in industries where you had no track record. During my lunch break, I called Alex to let him know that I'd given notice. "How did it go?" he asked, and I could hear the concern in his voice. Better than expected, actually. My boss wasn't thrilled, but she didn't try to talk me out of it or make things difficult. "And how are you feeling about everything?" I paused, trying to identify the complex mix of emotions I was experiencing. Excited, terrified, like I'm about to jump off a cliff, but also like I've been waiting my whole life for the chance to fly. Alex laughed. "That sounds about right for any major life change. Listen, I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner tonight. Nothing formal, just the two of us. I thought we could talk more about the company and also..." He trailed off. Also, I'd like to spend more time with you that doesn't involve business networking or performance evaluation." The warmth in his voice made my stomach flutter. "I'd like that too." "Great. There's a little Italian place in the village that I love, Nonna's Kitchen. It's not fancy, but the food is incredible. Would 7 p.m. work?" After we hung up, I sat in the small break room at Sterling & Associates, eating my usual lunch of yogurt and granola, and tried to process the fact that in a few hours, I would be having dinner with Alexander Chen, not as part of a business meeting or social evaluation, but as something that felt suspiciously like a date. The afternoon dragged by with unusual slowness. I found myself checking the clock every few minutes, which was ridiculous since I still had hours to go. I tried to focus on transitioning my current projects to other team members, but my mind kept wandering to what I would wear to dinner, what we would talk about, whether this was a good idea or a potentially career-ending mistake. At 5:30 p.m., I practically ran out of the office and headed home to change. Mia wasn't back from her own job yet, so I had the apartment to myself while I tried on 3 different outfits before settling on dark jeans, a soft gray sweater, and ankle boots. The goal was to look like I'd made an effort without appearing to be trying too hard, a balance that was trickier to achieve than it sounded. Nana's Kitchen turned out to be a tiny restaurant tucked between a vintage bookstore and a shop that sold handmade jewelry. The kind of place that looked like it had been serving the same families for decades, with checkered tablecloths and wine bottles used as candle holders. It was completely different from Café Morgenstern, and somehow that felt significant. Alex was already seated at a small table near the back when I arrived, and he stood up to greet me with a hug that felt warm and natural. He was dressed casually again, jeans and a dark blue button-down, and he looked more relaxed than I'd seen him at either of our previous meetings. "This place is perfect," I said, looking around at the cozy interior and breathing in the scents of garlic and basil, and something that smelled like fresh bread. I discovered it about 5 years ago, back when I was still running Neuralink and working 18-hour days. I used to come here late at night when I needed to get away from the corporate world for a while. We ordered wine and pasta, and for the first time since I'd met him, our conversation flowed without any underlying agenda or evaluation. Alex told me about growing up in San Francisco, about his parents who were both engineers and had immigrated from Taiwan before he was born. He talked about the early days of building Neuralink in a shared workspace, about the stress and excitement of rapid growth, about the surreal experience of suddenly having more money than he could reasonably spend in a lifetime. "It changes your perspective on everything," he said, twirling linguine around his fork. "When you can afford anything you want, you start realizing that most of what you thought you wanted wasn't actually important. What did you discover was important? Purpose, connection, the feeling that what you're doing matters to someone other than yourself." I told him about my own background, about growing up in a town where everyone knew each other's business, about my parents who had worked steady jobs their entire lives and couldn't quite understand why their daughter wanted to move to New York to chase dreams that seemed impractical and expensive. "They're proud of me," I said, "but I think they're also worried that I'm setting myself up for disappointment. Like maybe I should have stayed in Ohio and married someone from high school and gotten a job at the local bank." "Do you ever think they might be right?" I considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, especially when I'm lying awake at 2 a.m. worrying about rent money, or when I see my college friends posting photos from their suburban homes with their husbands and babies and matching kitchen appliances. There's something to be said for that kind of stability. But I've never been able to shake the feeling that I was meant for something more. Not more important necessarily, but more me, if that makes sense." Alex reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "It makes perfect sense. That's exactly why I think you're going to be incredible at this job, Emma. You understand what it means to take risks for something you believe in." The touch of his hand sent warmth shooting up my arm, and suddenly the air between us felt charged again, the way it had on his terrace 2 nights ago. But this time, there were no dinner guests to interrupt, no professional boundaries to maintain. Nothing but the two of us in a dimly lit restaurant, surrounded by the quiet conversations of other diners. "Alex," I said softly, "what are we doing here?" "Having dinner," he said, but his eyes were serious. "You know what I mean." He was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of my hand. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. All I know is that I haven't felt this way about someone well, maybe ever. And I know that complicates things with the job, and I know there are a million reasons why this might not be a good idea, but I can't seem to care about any of that right now. Neither can I admitted. We finished dinner slowly, neither of us wanting the evening to end. Alex insisted on paying despite my protests, and then we walked out into the cool October night. The village was alive with people heading to bars and shows and late dinners, the sidewalks bustling with energy and possibility. "Would you like to go for a walk?" Alex asked. "There's something I'd like to show you." We strolled through the narrow, tree-lined streets of the village, past brownstones with lit windows that offered glimpses of other people's lives, families having dinner, couples cooking together, someone playing piano in a front room. The evening was perfect for walking, cool enough to be invigorating but warm enough that we didn't need jackets. "Where are we going?" I asked as Alex led me toward what looked like a small park. "Washington Square," he said. "I know it's touristy, but there's something about that arch at night that I've always found inspiring." Washington Square Park was indeed full of tourists, but also local residents walking their dogs, NYU students heading to and from classes, street musicians playing for tips. The famous arch was lit up against the dark sky, and beyond it, we could see the lights of the city stretching north toward Midtown. We found an empty bench and sat down, close enough that our shoulders were touching. For a few minutes, we just watched the flow of people around us, the constant motion that was such a fundamental part of life in New York. "Can I tell you something?" Alex said eventually, always. "When I sold Neuralink, everyone assumed I'd be thrilled, and I was for about a week. But then I started feeling empty, I guess, like I'd achieved this thing I'd been working toward for years, and it turned out to be less satisfying than I'd expected." "Is that why you started Chen Clean Energy?" "Partly, but also because I realized that having money only matters if you can use it to do something meaningful. And I started thinking about all the ways that clean energy could change people's lives, not just reduce carbon emissions, but actually improve economic opportunities for communities that have been left out of the traditional energy economy." He turned to face me more directly. "Emma, what happened between us on Sunday night? That wasn't part of some elaborate business plan. I wasn't expecting to meet you and feel this." He gestured vaguely between us. "But I also don't want you to think that the job offer is contingent on anything personal. Chen Clean Energy needs you professionally, regardless of what does or doesn't happen between us personally." "I believe you," I said, and I realized that I did. Despite all the reasons I had to be suspicious, the dramatic difference in our financial situations, the fact that we'd known each other for less than a week, the obvious potential for things to go very wrong, I trusted him. "Good," he said, looking relieved, "because I have a confession to make." "What kind of confession?" Instead of answering with words, he leaned over and kissed me. This kiss was different from the one on his terrace, slower, more deliberate, without the urgent energy that had characterized our first moment of connection. This felt like a question being asked and answered, like a decision being made by both of us together. When we broke apart, I was breathing hard and my heart was racing. "That kind of confession," Alex murmured against my ear, and I could hear the smile in his voice. We sat on that bench for another hour, talking and kissing and watching the city move around us. By the time Alex walked me to the subway station, it was nearly midnight, and I felt like I was floating several inches above the ground. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said as I headed toward the turnstiles. "We're having lunch with Margaret Sullivan to talk about the investment structure for Chen Clean Energy." "Business lunch," I said, trying to shift back into professional mode. "Business lunch," he agreed, but the way he was looking at me suggested that maintaining professional boundaries was going to be more challenging than either of us had anticipated. The subway ride home gave me 45 minutes to think about what I was getting myself into. In the space of less than a week, I had quit my job, accepted a position with a startup company, and begun what appeared to be a romantic relationship with my new boss, who also happened to be a billionaire. Any rational person would probably advise me to slow down, to be more cautious, to think through the potential consequences more carefully. But as the train carried me through the tunnels beneath Manhattan, past stations where other people were starting or ending their own Monday nights, I couldn't bring myself to feel anything but excited about what came next. For the first time in 3 years, my life felt like it was moving in a direction that I had chosen, rather than simply responding to circumstances beyond my control. When I got home, Mia was waiting up with a bottle of wine and an expression that suggested she wasn't going to let me go to bed without a full debriefing. "Okay," she said, handing me a glass of wine before I'd even gotten my coat off. "Tell me everything, and I mean everything." I told her about dinner, about the walk through the village, about the conversations that had felt deeper and more meaningful than anything I'd experienced in months of dating in New York. When I got to the part about kissing on the bench in Washington Square Park, she actually got up and did a little victory dance around our living room. "Emma, this is it," she said. "This is your fairy tale moment. It's not a fairy tale, Mia. It's real life, which means it's complicated and messy, and there are about 1,000 ways this could go wrong. Or," she said, settling back onto the couch next to me, "there's one way it could go incredibly right." I wanted to believe her. Sitting there in our tiny apartment, sharing cheap wine with my best friend and roommate, I wanted to believe that this was the beginning of something wonderful, rather than the setup for an elaborate disaster. "I'm scared," I admitted. "What if I'm not ready for this? What if I screw up the job? Or what if the personal stuff gets in the way of the professional stuff? Or what if I'm just completely out of my league?" Mia reached over and squeezed my hand. "Emma, do you remember what you told me when I was thinking about applying for that promotion at work last year?" "No, what?" "You said that being scared means you're about to do something that matters. You said that if I wasn't a little terrified, it probably wasn't worth doing." I laughed, recognizing my own words. "I hate it when you use my advice against me. Then maybe you should start taking it yourself." That night I lay in bed replaying every moment of the evening. The way Alex had looked at me across the dinner table, the feeling of his hand covering mine, the gentleness of his kiss in Washington Square Park. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and complications, but tonight, I was going to let myself feel happy. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. "Thank you for a perfect evening. Sweet dreams, Emma." I typed back, "Thank you for showing me Washington Square at night. See you tomorrow." As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about how much my life had changed in just 4 days. This time last week, I'd been lying in this same bed, listening to the party upstairs and wondering how I was going to make rent. Now I was falling asleep thinking about business lunches with venture capitalists and whatever was developing between me and Alexander Chen. Change, I realized, could happen faster than you ever expected. The trick was being brave enough to let it. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of October weather that made New York feel moody and romantic. I woke up earlier than usual, partly because I was nervous about the lunch meeting with Margaret Sullivan, and partly because I couldn't stop thinking about the previous evening with Alex. I dressed more carefully than I had for work in months, choosing my best blazer and the dress pants that actually fit properly, as opposed to the ones that were a little too long and frayed at the cuffs. Today felt important in a way that transcended the usual routine of office life. The morning at Sterling & Associates passed in a blur of project transitions and status updates. Several of my colleagues made comments about how I seemed different, happier, more energetic, more confident. I couldn't exactly tell them that I'd spent the previous evening kissing a billionaire in Washington Square Park, so I deflected with vague comments about being excited about new opportunities. At 12:45 p.m., I found myself standing outside Le Bernardin, the kind of restaurant I'd only seen in movies and magazine articles. The type of place where lunch for two probably cost more than I usually spent on groceries in a month. I checked my reflection in the restaurant's glass doors, trying to calm my nerves and project the confidence of someone who belonged in this world. Alex was waiting in the lobby, and the moment I saw him, some of my nervousness dissipated. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but his smile was the same warm, genuine expression I'd fallen for over dinner the night before. "Ready for this?" he asked, offering me his arm. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, taking his arm and trying not to think about how natural it felt to walk beside him. Margaret Sullivan was already seated at a corner table that offered privacy, while still providing views of the restaurant's elegant interior. She stood to greet us, and I was struck again by her presence. This was a woman who was used to making decisions that involved millions of dollars, and it showed in every aspect of her demeanor. "Emma," she said, shaking my hand with a firm grip, "I'm so glad we have a chance to talk more extensively. I was impressed by your insights on Sunday evening." "Thank you," I said, settling into my seat and trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I'm excited to learn more about the investment landscape for clean energy companies." What followed was 2 hours of the most intellectually stimulating conversation I'd had in years. Margaret asked detailed questions about community engagement strategies, about market penetration approaches, about the challenges of building trust with demographics that had been underserved by traditional energy companies. Alex contributed insights about the technical aspects of their solar technology, but he also frequently turned to me for my perspective on marketing and outreach. The remarkable thing was that I found myself holding my own in the conversation. The research I'd been doing since Sunday, combined with my actual experience in marketing and my understanding of what it was like to struggle financially, gave me a unique perspective that both Margaret and Alex seemed to value. "Emma," Margaret said as we were finishing our entrees, "Alex has told me about his offer for you to head up community outreach for Chen Clean Energy. Can I ask what your long-term vision is for that role?" I took a sip of water to buy myself a moment to think. This felt like a test, but not the kind of artificial evaluation I'd experienced at Alex's dinner party. This was Margaret trying to determine whether I was someone she wanted to invest in. "I think the clean energy industry has made the mistake of assuming that environmental consciousness is the primary motivator for adoption," I said. "But for most people, especially those in lower-income communities, the decision to switch to solar power is going to be based on economic factors. Whether it saves money, whether it provides more stability than traditional utility companies, whether it creates local job opportunities." Margaret was nodding, clearly engaged. "Go on." "So my approach would be to build campaigns around economic empowerment rather than environmental responsibility. Partner with community organizations that already have trust and credibility. Create financing options that make sense for people who don't have perfect credit or large amounts of disposable income. And make sure that the jobs created by clean energy expansion actually go to people in the communities we're trying to serve." "That's exactly what I want to hear," Margaret said, leaning back in her chair with a satisfied expression. "Alex, I think you've found your community outreach director." After Margaret left, Alex and I lingered over coffee, both of us still energized by the intensity of the business conversation. "How do you think that went?" I asked. "I think Margaret is going to recommend a substantial investment," Alex said, grinning. "And I think you just proved that you're going to be incredible at this job." It felt good, I admitted, like I was finally getting to use my brain for something that mattered. "Emma, there's something I want to discuss with you, about the company structure, and how this is all going to work." I felt a flutter of nervousness. "Okay, I want you to have equity in Chen Clean Energy, not just a salary, but actual ownership in what we're building together." The words hit me like a physical force. Equity meant that if the company succeeded, I wouldn't just have a good job, I would have a financial stake in that success. It was the kind of opportunity that could change my life in ways I'd never even imagined. "Alex, that's incredible, but are you sure? I mean, we've known each other for less than a week." "I'm sure, Emma. What you did in there with Margaret, the way you understood the market, the way you articulated a vision for community engagement, that's not something you can teach or fake. That's insight that comes from lived experience and genuine intelligence. I want you to be a real partner in this, not just an employee." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, and I had to take a moment to compose myself. "Thank you," I managed finally. "This is This is going to change everything for me. I hope so, Alex said softly. You deserve to have everything change for you. We walked out of the restaurant into the drizzly afternoon, and I felt like I was floating. Equity. In a startup company. A real voice in building something from the ground up. The chance to do work that actually mattered. Emma, Alex said as we stood on the sidewalk outside Le Bernardin. I know we said we were going to keep the personal and professional stuff separate, but I have to ask, would you like to come to my apartment tonight? I could cook dinner, we could talk more about the company, and maybe... He trailed off, looking suddenly uncertain. Maybe, I prompted, though I thought I knew what he was asking. Maybe we could stop pretending that what's happening between us is just professional. The rain was getting heavier, and pedestrians around us were hurrying to find shelter or opening umbrellas. But standing there on the sidewalk with Alex, I felt warm and protected despite the weather. I'd like that, I said. But I should probably go home and change first. These are my only good work clothes, and if I'm coming to your apartment... Emma, Alex said, stepping closer to me, you don't need to change anything about yourself for me. Ever. The sincerity in his voice made my heart race. Okay, I said. Yes, I'd love to come to your apartment tonight. Perfect, 7 o'clock. By the time I made it back to my own apartment, I was soaked from the rain but grinning like an idiot. Mia took one look at me and immediately abandoned whatever she'd been doing to demand a full report. It went that well? She said, handing me a towel for my dripping hair. Mia, I think I might actually be good at this, like, really good. Margaret Sullivan was asking me about market strategies and community engagement approaches, and I had answers. Real, thoughtful answers that made sense. Of course you did. Emma, you've always been brilliant. You've just never had anyone recognize it before. I told her about the equity offer, about Alex's invitation for dinner, about the feeling that my entire life was reshaping itself around possibilities I'd never dared to imagine. So what are you going to wear tonight? Mia asked, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. I was just going to wear what I have on. Alex said I didn't need to change anything. Emma Rodriguez, Mia said, using my full name in the tone she reserved for serious conversations. You are about to have dinner at a billionaire's penthouse apartment, and based on the way you're glowing right now, I suspect dinner isn't the only thing on tonight's agenda. You are not wearing work clothes. She disappeared into her bedroom and returned with an armful of options. Dresses, tops, jewelry that I'd never seen her wear. For the next hour, we turned my tiny bedroom into an impromptu styling session, trying different combinations until we found something that felt right. The winner was a soft burgundy dress that Mia had bought for a wedding but never worn, paired with a delicate gold necklace that had been her grandmother's. The dress fit me perfectly, somehow managing to be both elegant and understated, professional and feminine. You look beautiful, Mia said, and her voice was soft with genuine affection. Emma, I'm so proud of you. Not just for the job stuff, but for being brave enough to let this happen. I'm terrified, I admitted, looking at myself in our propped-up mirror. Good, she said. That means it's important. At exactly 7 p.m., I stood outside Alex's building again, but this time felt completely different from Sunday night. Then I'd been nervous about meeting his friends and making a good impression. Tonight, it was just the two of us, and the electricity I'd been feeling since our first coffee date had intensified into something that felt both inevitable and slightly overwhelming. The concierge recognized me from Sunday and directed me to the penthouse elevator without needing to check his list. As the elevator rose through the floors of the building, I tried to calm my nerves and prepare myself for whatever the evening might bring. The elevator opened directly into Alex's apartment, just as it had before, but tonight the space felt more intimate. The overhead lights were dimmed, candles were lit throughout the living area, and I could smell something incredible cooking in the kitchen. Music was playing softly, something instrumental and jazzy that I didn't recognize, but that made the entire apartment feel warm and welcoming. Emma, Alex said, appearing from the kitchen wearing jeans and a navy blue sweater, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. You look absolutely beautiful. Thank you, I said, suddenly feeling shy despite all the intensity of our previous interactions. Something smells amazing. I'm making risotto, he said, taking my coat and hanging it in a closet near the elevator. I hope you're hungry because I may have gotten a little carried away with the cooking. He led me into the kitchen, which was even more impressive than the rest of the apartment. Professional-grade appliances, a massive island with seating, windows that offered views of Central Park even from this angle. Alex moved around the space with easy confidence, stirring the risotto and checking something in the oven. "Can I help with anything?" I asked. "You can keep me company," he said, handing me a glass of wine. "And tell me how the rest of your day went after our lunch." I told him about the afternoon at Sterling and Associates, about my colleagues' reactions to the news that I was leaving, about the surreal feeling of transitioning out of a job that had defined my life for the past 3 years. Alex listened intently while he cooked, asking questions and making observations that showed he understood the emotional complexity of major life changes. "It's strange," I said, watching him plate the risotto with the kind of precision that suggested he really knew what he was doing in the kitchen. "Part of me is excited about leaving Sterling and Associates, but part of me is also sad. It wasn't the perfect job, but it was my job, you know? It was the thing that brought me to New York and gave me a reason to be here." "And now you have a new reason to be here," Alex said, setting our plates on the kitchen island and taking the seat next to mine. "Do I?" I asked, and the question came out more vulnerable than I'd intended. Alex paused with his fork halfway to his mouth and looked at me seriously. "Emma, I can't make you any promises about where this is all heading, but I can tell you that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. And I can tell you that Chen Clean Energy is going to be incredible, with or without whatever happens between us personally." "How do I feel about you?" I asked, and I realized I genuinely wanted to know his perspective. "Like you're someone I've been looking for without knowing I was looking," he said simply. "Like you're going to change my life in ways I can't predict yet." The risotto was perfect, creamy and rich and flavored with mushrooms and herbs that I couldn't identify. We ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing as easily as it had during our previous dinners together. But underneath the easy chatter, there was an undercurrent of anticipation, a sense that the evening was building toward something that both of us wanted, but neither of us had explicitly acknowledged. After dinner, Alex led me back to the living room area, where he'd set up coffee service on the low table in front of the couch. The view from the windows was spectacular. Central Park spread out below us, the lights of the city twinkling in the distance, the whole scene looking like something from a movie about sophisticated people leading glamorous lives. "I still can't quite believe this is real," I said, settling onto the couch next to him. "A week ago, I was eating ramen noodles for dinner and worrying about making rent. Now I'm sitting in a penthouse apartment, talking about equity stakes in clean energy companies." "Do you miss it?" Alex asked. "The simplicity of your old life?" I thought about the question seriously. I miss some things about it. I miss feeling like I understood my place in the world, even if that place wasn't particularly comfortable. Everything feels possible now, but also uncertain. "Emma," Alex said, and something in his tone made me turn to face him more directly. "There's something I need to tell you." My heart started beating faster. "What?" "I've been thinking a lot about the ethics of this situation. You're going to be working for my company, and I'm clearly attracted to you, and I don't want you to ever feel like your job security depends on your personal relationship with me." "Okay," I said carefully, "so I want to give you something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This is a contract guaranteeing your position and equity stake at Chen Clean Energy for a minimum of 2 years, regardless of what happens between us personally. I want you to feel completely secure in your professional situation, independent of anything else." I took the envelope with shaking hands. "Alex, this is me making sure that you never have to choose between your career and your personal happiness." I want you to be able to tell me exactly how you feel about everything, without worrying about the consequences for your job. I opened the envelope and scanned the contract quickly. It was exactly what he'd described, a guarantee of employment and equity that would be valid regardless of the status of our personal relationship. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Because I care about you. Because I want you to trust me completely. And because I'm hoping that once you feel secure about the professional stuff, you'll be able to focus on the personal stuff." I set the contract aside and looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who had appeared in my life less than a week ago and turned everything upside down. This man who was offering me financial security, professional opportunities, and what felt like the possibility of real love, all at the same time. "How do I feel about you?" I asked, echoing his earlier question. "I have no idea," he said, but he was smiling. Instead of answering with words, I leaned over and kissed him. This time there was no hesitation, no sense of testing the waters or seeing what might happen. This was a kiss that acknowledged everything that had been building between us since our first coffee date, everything that had been simmering underneath our professional interactions and careful conversations. Alex's hands came up to frame my face, and I could taste the wine we'd had with dinner, could feel the warmth of his skin, could hear the soft sound he made when I deepened the kiss. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "Emma," he whispered, his forehead resting against mine. "I know," I said, because I could feel it too. The sense that we were standing on the edge of something that would change both of our lives forever. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, and I could hear the vulnerability in his voice, the genuine concern for my feelings and my choices. Instead of answering, I stood up and extended my hand to him. "Show me your bedroom." The next morning, I woke up in Alex's bed with sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the sounds of the city far below filtering up from the street. For a moment, I was disoriented. The bed was too comfortable, the sheets too soft, the view too spectacular to be real. Then I remembered everything that had happened the night before, and I felt a rush of happiness so intense it was almost overwhelming. Alex was already awake, propped up on one elbow and watching me with an expression of quiet contentment. "Good morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning," I replied, suddenly feeling shy despite everything we'd shared the night before. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," I admitted. "This bed is incredible. I think your mattress costs more than most people's cars." Alex laughed, a sound that was quickly becoming one of my favorite things in the world. "Probably true, but it's not the mattress that made you sleep well." "Oh, what was it then?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I knew what he was going to say. "It was knowing that you're exactly where you're supposed to be," he said, leaning down to kiss me gently. We lay there for a while longer, talking quietly and watching the morning light change the colors of Central Park. Eventually, Alex got up to make coffee, and I borrowed one of his shirts to wear while we had breakfast on the terrace. Sitting outside in the October morning air, wearing Alex's soft cotton shirt and drinking coffee that probably cost more per pound than I used to spend on groceries for a week, I felt like I was living someone else's life, but it was a life that fit me in ways I was still discovering. "What happens now?" I asked as Alex refilled my coffee cup. "What do you want to happen?" I thought about the question seriously. "I want to do incredible work with Chen Clean Energy. I want to help build something that actually makes a difference in people's lives. I want to learn everything I can about clean energy technology and community engagement and running a company." "And personally?" I looked at him across the small table, this man who had changed everything for me in less than a week. "Personally, I want to see where this goes. I want to get to know you better. I want to figure out how to balance a professional relationship with a personal one without screwing up either." "I want all of those things too," Alex said. "Emma, I know this is all happening very fast, and I know there are a lot of potential complications, but I've never been more sure about anything in my life." "Really? Really? You're the best thing that's happened to me in years, both professionally and personally." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Happy tears, but tears nonetheless. Alex, I need you to know that a week ago, I was literally counting quarters to see if I could afford to buy milk. And now you're offering me equity in your company. And I'm sitting on your terrace in Central Park West. And I slept in your arms last night. And sometimes I feel like I'm going to wake up and discover this was all a dream. It's not a dream, Alex said firmly. This is real life, Emma, your real life, and you deserve every bit of it. After breakfast, Alex offered to have his driver take me home, but I insisted on taking the subway, partly because I wasn't ready for that level of luxury to become normal, and partly because I needed the 45-minute ride to process everything that had happened. As the train carried me downtown, I stared at my reflection in the window and tried to reconcile the woman looking back at me with the woman who had been lying in bed, listening to parties she couldn't afford just a week ago. Same face, same hair, same basic features. But something fundamental had shifted. I looked like someone who had possibilities now, someone who was moving towards something rather than just trying to survive. Mia was waiting for me when I got home, practically vibrating with curiosity. Don't even try to tell me you came home last night because I was here and you definitely did not come home last night, she said before I'd even gotten my coat off. I didn't come home last night, I confirmed. And then I told her everything. Well, not everything. Some details were private, but I told her about dinner, about the contract guaranteeing my job security, about the conversation we'd had about balancing professional and personal relationships. When I got to the part about waking up in his apartment, she actually squealed. Emma, this is incredible. You're living in a romance novel. It feels pretty incredible, I admitted, but also terrifying. What if I screw this up, Mia? What if I'm not ready for this level of success or this kind of relationship or any of it? Mia sat down on our couch and patted the cushion next to her, just like she had a few nights ago when I'd been panicking about meeting Alex for the first time. Emma, do you remember what you were like when you first moved to New York? Scared and broke? Determined and fearless, she corrected. You moved to the most expensive city in the country with barely any money and no job prospects, and you made it work. You've been ready for success your entire life. You just never had the opportunity before. But what if the personal stuff complicates the professional stuff? What if we can't make it work? Then you'll figure it out just like you always do. Emma, you're one of the smartest, most resourceful people I know. You're not going to let anything derail your career, and you're not going to let fear keep you from being happy. That afternoon, I spent several hours researching everything I could find about clean energy companies, community engagement strategies, and the specific challenges of marketing to underserved populations. If I was going to be the head of community outreach for Chen Clean Energy, I was going to be the best head of community outreach they could possibly have. I also made a list of questions I wanted to ask Alex about the company structure, the timeline for launching, the specific communities we'd be targeting first. Despite everything that was happening between us personally, I was determined to be completely professional about the business side of our relationship. My phone rang around 4 p.m., and Alex's name appeared on the screen. Hi, I said, and I could hear the smile in my own voice. Hi yourself, how's your afternoon going? Productively. I've been doing research on community engagement approaches for clean energy companies. I have about a dozen questions for you about Chen Clean Energy's launch timeline. I love that you're taking this seriously, Alex said, and I could hear the warmth in his voice. Emma, I was wondering if you'd like to come to the office tomorrow morning. I'd like to show you the space, introduce you to the team we've got so far, and start talking through some of the practical aspects of your role. You have an office already? We have an office, a small team, and several projects in development. This isn't just an idea, Emma. It's a real company that's ready to launch. The next morning, I took the subway to Soho and found myself standing outside a converted warehouse that had been transformed into modern office space. The building directory listed Chen Clean Energy on the 4th floor, and when I stepped off the elevator, I was greeted by a reception area that managed to feel both professional and welcoming. Alex appeared almost immediately, dressed in his usual jeans and button-down combination, looking excited and slightly nervous. "Ready for the tour?" he asked. The office space was incredible, open and airy, with exposed brick walls and huge windows that let in natural light. There were maybe a dozen people working at various stations, and the energy in the room felt focused and purposeful. Alex introduced me to the team members who were already on board. Sarah, a policy analyst who had worked for the Department of Energy. Marcus, a software engineer who was developing the customer interface systems. Janet, a project manager who had experience with large-scale solar installations. And several others, whose expertise ranged from finance to community organizing. "Emma is going to be heading up our community outreach and marketing efforts," Alex told the team, and I was struck by how naturally he presented me as a key member of the leadership team. We spent the morning in a conference room, talking through Chen Clean Energy's business plan in detail. The scope of what Alex was proposing was both ambitious and realistic, starting with pilot programs in 3 communities in the tri-state area, then expanding based on what they learned from those initial installations. "Our first pilot community is going to be in Newark," Alex explained, pulling up a map on the conference room's large monitor. "We've already been in conversation with community leaders there, and they're excited about the potential for local job creation and reduced energy costs." "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" I asked. "We want to launch the Newark pilot in January, which gives us about 2 months to finalize the community engagement strategy, hire local staff, and complete the regulatory approvals." 2 months. In 2 months, I would be leading community outreach efforts for a real clean energy project that could impact hundreds of families. The responsibility felt enormous and exciting at the same time. "Alex, I want to visit Newark," I said. "I want to meet the community leaders you've been talking to, understand their concerns and priorities, and see the area where we'd be installing solar systems." "I was hoping you'd say that," Alex said, grinning. "I've set up a community meeting for next week. You'll be able to meet with local residents, business owners, and community organizers to talk through what this project could mean for Newark." After the meeting, Alex and I walked to a nearby cafe for lunch, and I found myself thinking about how different this felt from my job at Sterling & Associates. Instead of creating marketing campaigns for luxury watches, I was going to be helping families reduce their energy costs while creating jobs in their community. Instead of working for clients who saw people as demographic targets, I was going to be working directly with the communities we were trying to serve. "How are you feeling about everything?" Alex asked as we settled at a small table by the window. "Excited, nervous, like I'm about to do the most important work of my life." "You are about to do the most important work of your life," Alex said seriously. "Emma, this isn't just a job. It's a chance to be part of something that could change how clean energy companies approach community engagement." "No pressure, right?" I said, laughing. "No pressure," Alex agreed, but his expression was serious. "Emma, I believe in you completely. You're going to be incredible at this." That afternoon, Alex walked me through the financial projections for Chen Clean Energy, and I began to understand the scope of what he was building. This wasn't a small startup hoping to make a modest impact. This was a company with the potential to scale nationally, to influence how the entire clean energy industry thought about community engagement and economic justice. "Alex," I said as we were reviewing the equity structure he was proposing for me, "I need to ask you something. Anything. Are you giving me this opportunity because you think I'm the best person for the job, or because you're attracted to me?" Alex set down his pen and looked at me directly. "Emma, I'm attracted to you because you're brilliant, passionate, and genuine. Those same qualities make you the best person for this job. I'm not giving you this opportunity despite my feelings for you. I'm giving it to you partly because of what those feelings tell me about who you are as a person." "That's a good answer," I said, feeling relieved. "It's an honest answer. Emma, if I'd met you and only seen you as a romantic interest, I never would have offered you this position. If I'd met you and only seen you as a potential employee, I might not have recognized the personal connection. But because I see both sides of who you are, I know that you're exactly what Chen Clean Energy needs." That evening, Alex and I had dinner at another small restaurant, this time a Thai place in the village that he swore had the best pad Thai in Manhattan. The conversation flowed easily between business and personal topics, and I was struck by how comfortable this was starting to feel. Not just the physical attraction, which was definitely still there, but the deeper compatibility that was emerging as we got to know each other better. "Can I ask you something?" I said as we were walking back to his apartment after dinner. "Always." "What was your longest relationship before this?" Alex was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "About 8 months with a woman named Jennifer who worked in venture capital. It ended because she was more interested in being with someone successful than in being with me specifically." "How could you tell the difference?" "She never asked me about my thoughts or feelings about anything that wasn't directly related to business success. She liked the idea of dating a tech entrepreneur, but she wasn't particularly interested in who I was as a person." "And what about you? What's your relationship history like?" I told him about my college boyfriend, who had been a perfectly nice guy but who had wanted me to move back to Ohio after graduation and get married immediately. About the series of disappointing dates I'd had in New York. Guys who were either intimidated by my ambition or who assumed that my financial struggles meant I was looking for someone to take care of me. "I think I was waiting for someone who could see both sides of me," I said. "Someone who was attracted to my ambition but also comfortable with my vulnerability. Someone who wanted to build something together rather than just wanting to rescue me or be rescued by me." "Is that what you think we're doing? Building something together?" "I think we might be," I said, "both professionally and personally." We spent that night at Alex's apartment again, and when I woke up Thursday morning, it felt natural in a way that surprised me. Not like I was staying in someone else's space, but like I was waking up where I belonged. Over breakfast, Alex mentioned that he had a business dinner that evening with some potential investors from California. "You should come," he said. "I'd like them to meet you, and I think you'd find the conversation interesting." "Are you sure? I don't want to complicate your business relationships." "Emma, you're going to be heading up community outreach for Chen Clean Energy. These investors need to meet you eventually. Better to do it now, when you can help shape their understanding of what we're trying to accomplish." That evening, I found myself at another high-end restaurant, this time in Midtown, sitting across from 2 venture capitalists from Silicon Valley, who had flown in specifically to learn more about Chen Clean Energy. But instead of feeling intimidated the way I had at my first lunch with Margaret Sullivan, I felt confident and prepared. The investors, David Chen, again no relation to Alex, and Patricia Williams, asked detailed questions about community engagement strategies, about the challenges of building trust with underserved populations, about the potential for scaling these approaches to other markets. I found myself drawing on everything I'd learned from my research, from my own background, and from the conversations I'd had with community leaders in my previous marketing roles. "Emma," Patricia said toward the end of the evening, "your approach to community engagement is exactly what the clean energy industry needs. Too many companies in this space are focused on top-down solutions that don't account for local needs and cultural factors." After the investors left, Alex and I walked along Fifth Avenue, enjoying the mild October evening and the energy of the city around us. "That went well," I said, still feeling energized from the dinner conversation. "It went incredibly well. Emma, you were brilliant tonight. Patricia and David were impressed not just by your ideas but by your passion for the work." "I love this," I admitted. "I love feeling like what I'm doing matters, like I'm contributing to something bigger than myself." "You are contributing to something bigger than yourself, Emma. What you're bringing to Chen Clean Energy, your understanding of what it's like to struggle financially, your insight into how to reach communities that have been ignored by traditional marketing approaches, your genuine passion for social justice, that's going to be the foundation of everything we build." That weekend, Alex and I drove to Newark to meet with community leaders and tour the neighborhoods where Chen Clean Energy would be implementing its first pilot program. The meetings were held in a community center that had clearly seen better days, but the energy in the room was incredible. Local residents asked thoughtful questions about job creation, about maintenance and support for solar installations, about what would happen if the company decided to leave the community. I found myself drawing on every conversation I'd ever had with Mrs. Kim about building trust with customers, every insight I'd gained from my own experience of feeling financially vulnerable. "What we're proposing isn't charity," I told the assembled group. "This is a business partnership that should benefit everyone involved. You should expect us to deliver on our promises, and you should hold us accountable if we don't." After the meeting, an older woman named Dorothy approached me with a smile. "You talk like someone who understands what it's like to worry about paying bills," she said. "Because I do understand that," I replied. 6 months ago, I was choosing between buying groceries and paying my electric bill. "Good," Dorothy said firmly. "We need people who understand." On the drive back to Manhattan, Alex was quiet, seeming to process everything we'd experienced during the day. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. "I'm thinking about how much I have to learn about the communities we want to serve," he said. "And I'm thinking about how lucky I am that you're going to be teaching me." "We're going to be learning together," I corrected. "Alex, I may understand what it's like to struggle financially, but I don't know anything about solar technology or energy policy or running a company. We're both going to be figuring this out as we go." "Together," he said, reaching over to take my hand. "Together," I agreed. That night, back at Alex's apartment, we made dinner together and talked through everything we'd learned from the Newark meetings. I was struck by how seamlessly we worked together, both in terms of the business planning and the simple domestic activity of cooking a meal. "Emma," Alex said as we were cleaning up after dinner, "there's something I want to talk to you about." The serious tone in his voice made me look at him sharply. "What?" "I've been thinking about how to handle the fact that we're both professionally and personally involved with each other. I want to make sure we're setting up structures that protect both relationships." "What kind of structures?" "Regular check-ins about how the dual relationship is working. Clear boundaries about decision-making authority. You'll have complete autonomy in your role as head of community outreach, and I won't override your decisions just because we're personally involved. And an agreement that if the personal relationship ever becomes problematic for the professional relationship, we'll address it directly rather than letting it fester." I thought about his proposal. That sounds mature and responsible. "I want this to work, Emma, both the company and the relationship. And I think being intentional about how we manage both is the best way to make that happen." "I want it to work too," I said. "Alex, can I tell you something?" "Always. I've never felt this way about anyone before, not just the attraction, but the feeling that we could really build something meaningful together. It's exciting and terrifying at the same time." Alex set down the dish he'd been drying and pulled me into his arms. "I feel exactly the same way. Emma, I think you might be the love of my life." The words hung in the air between us, more serious and definitive than anything either of us had said before. I felt my heart race, not with nervousness, but with recognition. "I think you might be the love of my life too," I whispered. Later that night, as we lay in bed talking about our plans for the Newark project, our hopes for Chen Clean Energy, our dreams for what we might build together, I realized that everything had changed, not just since the previous Friday, but since that morning. I wasn't just falling for Alex anymore. I was in love with him, completely and irrevocably. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The following Monday marked the official start of my new life. I'd finished my transition out of Sterling and Associates on Friday, and Monday morning I woke up in Alex's bed, which was starting to feel like our bed, as the head of community outreach for Chen Clean Energy. Alex had already left for an early meeting with solar panel suppliers, but he'd left a note on his pillow. "First day of changing the world. I love you. A. I love you." We'd said it to each other several times over the weekend, but seeing it written in Alex's handwriting made it feel more real somehow. I tucked the note into my purse and got dressed for my first official day as a clean energy executive. The commute to the Chen Clean Energy office felt different from my previous routine. Instead of the resignation with which I'd headed to Sterling and Associates every morning, I felt energized and purposeful. I was going to work on something that mattered, with people who respected my ideas, for a company that could actually change people's lives. My first week was a whirlwind of meetings, research, and planning sessions. I interviewed community organizers in Newark, reviewed market research on solar adoption rates in urban areas, and worked with Marcus to develop customer interface systems that would be accessible to people who might not be comfortable with technology. The work was challenging in ways that my previous job had never been. Instead of creating marketing campaigns based on demographic research and focus groups, I was trying to understand the real concerns and priorities of specific communities. Instead of selling luxury items to people who already had disposable income, I was trying to make clean energy accessible to families who had been ignored by the traditional energy industry. By Friday afternoon, I had developed a comprehensive community engagement strategy for the Newark pilot program, complete with local hiring quotas, multilingual outreach materials, and partnerships with community organizations that already had credibility and trust. "This is incredible work," Alex said, reviewing my presentation in the conference room. "Emma, this isn't just a marketing plan. It's a blueprint for how clean energy companies should approach community engagement." "It's a first draft," I said, though I was pleased by his reaction. "I want to get feedback from the community leaders in Newark before we finalize anything." "That's exactly the right approach. Emma, I think you've found your calling." That evening, Alex and I celebrated my first week at Chen Clean Energy by going to a small wine bar in the village. It was the kind of place I never would have been able to afford on my Sterling and Associates salary, but that felt appropriately celebratory without being ostentatious. "How does it feel?" Alex asked, raising his glass in a toast. "Being a clean energy executive?" "It feels like I'm finally using my brain for something that matters," I said, clinking my glass against his. "Alex, I love this work. I love feeling like what I do all day could actually improve people's lives." "You're going to improve a lot of people's lives," Alex said seriously. "Emma, what you've developed this week, the approach you're taking to community engagement, I think it's going to become a model for the entire industry." "Don't put that much pressure on me," I said, laughing, but I felt a flutter of pride at his words. "I'm not putting pressure on you. I'm just recognizing what you're capable of." Over the weekend, Alex and I fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Saturday morning, we went for a run in Central Park, then had brunch at a cafe near his apartment. Saturday afternoon, we both worked. Alex on financial projections for the company, me on refining my community engagement strategy. Saturday evening, we cooked dinner together and watched movies. Sunday, we drove back to Newark for another community meeting, this time to present my preliminary outreach plan and get feedback from local residents and business owners. The response was overwhelmingly positive, but also included thoughtful suggestions and important questions that I incorporated into my planning. "You've got a natural instinct for this," said James Martinez, a local business owner who had been skeptical of the project initially. "Most people who come into our community with big promises don't bother to ask what we actually need." "That's because most people are trying to sell you something," I replied. "We're trying to build something with you." That evening, back in Manhattan, Alex and I debriefed the meeting over takeout Chinese food on his couch. "I think we're ready to move forward with the Newark pilot," Alex said, reviewing the notes I'd taken during the community meeting. "Really? You think the community engagement strategy is solid?" "I think it's more than solid. Emma, what you've created isn't just a strategy. It's a new approach to how clean energy companies can work with communities. This is going to be the foundation of everything Chen Clean Energy does going forward." I felt a rush of pride and accomplishment that was unlike anything I'd experienced in my previous work. This wasn't just about professional recognition. It was about knowing that the work I was doing could genuinely improve people's lives. "Alex," I said, curling up against his side on the couch, "can I tell you something?" "Always." I think I'm happier than I've ever been in my entire life. Really? Really. The work is incredible. But it's not just the work. It's feeling like I'm in a partnership, both professionally and personally, with someone who sees me clearly and values what I bring to the relationship. Alex tightened his arms around me. Emma, you've changed my life in ways I'm still discovering. A month ago, I was a guy with a good business plan and a lot of money. Now I feel like I'm part of something that could actually matter. We're part of something that could actually matter, I corrected. We're part of something that will matter, Alex said firmly. Emma, what we're building together, Chen Clean Energy, this relationship, this life, it's going to be incredible. As I drifted off to sleep that night, wrapped in Alex's arms in the bed that was starting to feel like ours, I thought about how dramatically my life had changed in just 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, I'd been lying in my cramped studio apartment, listening to parties I couldn't afford and wondering how I was going to make rent. Now I was the head of community outreach for a clean energy company, in love with a man who saw me as an equal partner, and finally doing work that felt meaningful and important. Change, I'd learned, could happen faster than you ever expected. But the trick wasn't just being brave enough to let it happen. It was being wise enough to recognize when change was taking you exactly where you belonged. And as I fell asleep next to Alex, listening to the distant sounds of the city that had become my home, I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. A month later, Chen Clean Energy officially launched its Newark pilot program, with a community celebration that drew over 200 local residents, business owners, and city officials. I stood on a small stage in the same community center where we'd held our first meetings, looking out at faces that had become familiar over the weeks of planning and preparation. 3 months ago, I began. Someone asked me what it felt like to worry about paying your electric bill. I told them I knew exactly what that felt like, because 6 months earlier, I'd been choosing between buying groceries and keeping my power on. The crowd was listening intently, and I could see nodding heads and understanding expressions. That's why this project isn't just about solar panels or clean energy technology. It's about economic empowerment. It's about giving communities control over their own energy costs. It's about creating local jobs and building local wealth. It's about partnership, not charity. When I finished speaking, the applause was genuine and sustained. But more importantly, people approached me afterward to ask detailed questions about the program, to volunteer for community leadership roles, to suggest additional neighborhoods that might benefit from similar projects. Alex found me as the crowd was dispersing, and his smile was brighter than I'd ever seen it. "You were incredible up there," he said, pulling me into a hug. "Emma, I think this is just the beginning." "The beginning of what?" "Everything," he said simply. "Chen Clean Energy expanding to new communities, you becoming recognized as a leader in community engagement approaches, us building the life we want together." That evening, we celebrated at the same Thai restaurant where we'd had dinner during my first week at Chen Clean Energy. Over pad Thai and wine, we talked about expansion plans, about the next communities we wanted to serve, about the job applications that were starting to come in from people who wanted to work for a clean energy company that prioritized community partnership. "Alex," I said as we were walking home, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm ready to move in with you officially. I've been staying at your place most nights for weeks anyway, but I want to give up my apartment and make it official." Alex stopped walking and turned to face me with an expression of pure joy. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I love you. I love the life we're building together, and I'm ready to make it permanent." "Emma Rodriguez," Alex said, taking my hands in his, "you continue to be the best thing that's ever happened to me." 6 months later, I was standing on the terrace of our apartment, watching the sun set over Central Park and thinking about how much had changed since that October night when I'd first kissed Alex in this same spot. Chen Clean Energy had expanded to pilot programs in 4 communities across New York and New Jersey. I'd been featured in 3 industry publications as an expert on community engagement approaches for clean energy companies. We'd hired 12 additional employees, including several community organizers who had grown up in the neighborhoods we were serving. But more than the professional success, I was happy in ways I'd never imagined possible. Alex and I had found a rhythm that balanced ambitious professional goals with genuine personal intimacy. We challenged each other intellectually, supported each other emotionally, and built something together that was bigger than either of us could have created alone. My phone rang, and I glanced at the screen to see Mia's name. "How's the fancy Upper West Side life treating you?" she asked without preamble. "Pretty incredibly," I admitted. "Mia, I think I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For all the times I told you that fairy tale endings don't happen in real life." Mia laughed. "Emma, this isn't a fairy tale ending. This is a real-life beginning. You found work that matters to you, and you fell in love with someone who sees you clearly and values what you bring to the relationship. That's not magic. That's just what happens when you're brave enough to take risks for things you believe in." After we hung up, I stayed on the terrace for a while longer, watching the lights come on across the city. Alex would be home soon from his meeting with potential investors in Boston, and we'd have dinner together and talk about our respective days and plan for the week ahead. It was an ordinary evening in what had become our ordinary life. But it was an ordinary life that included meaningful work, financial security, genuine love, and the kind of partnership I'd dreamed about but never quite believed I'd find. A year ago, I'd been lying in a cramped studio apartment, listening to rich people party above me, and wondering if I'd made a mistake by moving to New York. Now I understood that every struggle, every disappointment, every moment of uncertainty had been leading me toward this life, this love, this work that felt like purpose. The elevator dinged, signaling Alex's return, and I heard his voice calling my name from inside the apartment. "Out here," I called back, and a moment later he appeared on the terrace, still carrying his briefcase but already reaching for me. "How did the meetings go?" I asked, settling into his arms. "Incredibly well. We've got funding secured for expansion into 3 more states," he said, then kissed the top of my head. "But more importantly, how was your day? How did the Newark site visit go?" As I told him about my afternoon, about the families who were already seeing reduced energy costs, about the local teenagers who were interested in solar installation training programs, about the small business owners who were considering adding solar panels to their buildings, I realized that this was what happiness looked like. Not a fairy tale with a definitive ending, but a real life with daily choices to build something meaningful with someone you love. And as the city lights twinkled below us and Alex's arms tightened around me, I knew that we were just getting started. Thank you so much for joining us on Emma's incredible journey from struggling marketing coordinator to successful clean energy executive and finding love along the way. What did you think of Emma's transformation and her relationship with Alex? Which moment in their story was your favorite? Was it their first coffee meeting, the dinner party, or maybe that romantic evening in Washington Square Park? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed Emma's story, and make sure to subscribe for more amazing tales of love, ambition, and life-changing opportunities. More incredible stories are coming your way, so hit that notification bell to never miss out on our latest uploads.